stuck here. The cops won't bother me.
That's right. This is a CB500X, and this is my second CB500X. Of course, I'm not counting this as mine because it's not. This one belongs to a chap named Dave Waka, and I am going to be riding this for him because he's moving to Arizona, and I'm going to be riding this bike for him out there because, you know, transportation is expensive, and while I'm riding it, basically the only thing I want is to get a flight back to DC, and he agreed to pay for it. So I'll be fronting all the hotels and stuff like that. So the other one that I had was not ABS, so this is a little bit heavier, but it's also a little bit safer, and I don't know how it behaves really. It's an excellent bike. I'm not used to the way it rides right now. This is the first time I'm riding it, and it's got a full fuel, full tank. The way you sit on it is a little bit different than the V-Strom. The V-Strom is a little bit, well, it's a lot larger. Physical presence is a lot larger. This one's a lot more nimble, but it takes a little bit of time to kind of get used to it. Also, you sit with your legs kind of further back. So on the V-Strom, you sit with a 90-degree angle on your legs, and on this one you sit with your legs a little bit further back than your knees. So it's a little bit more of a sporty ride when it comes to your lower half, but your upper half, it's very standard style, very upright. It's like the sit up and back position, except you have your knees, your legs slightly bent. It's a comfortable position, and there's not as much wind protection on this bike. It's a very, yeah, the clutch is it's like so high up. I'm not used to it, but it's a good bike. It's a very simple bike, and I do admire this because oftentimes bikes these days have just gotten so expensive, and I wanted to test this thing out before I ride it cross country. So stay tuned for, eventually I'm going to give you a ride report how this motorcycle does going cross country, because it is kind of important. A lot of motorcycle journalists, and I don't consider myself a motorcycle journalist even though I do a lot of reviews and stuff, they don't talk about how a bike behaves in the long term, like when you put 50,000 miles on it, when you ride it cross country for long extended periods. It's really just a few days that they ride it and they put it away. So this is kind of like my opportunity to take this cross country and see how this sort of bike does as a long-term tourer. I will be putting quite a few miles. Let me see how many miles this thing has. It's only got 5,000 miles. And look at this, it's got a average miles per gallon. I love that. Okay, I'm not really sure what that is. So it's only got 6,000 miles. This thing has only got 6,000 miles. Incredible. When you sit on it, you sit like kind of like on top of the bike instead, like in the bike with the V-Strom. The V-Strom, like the tank is like all the way up here. That creates the feeling that you are sitting more inside the bike, and of course the dash on the V-Strom is like higher up. Everything is higher up. That makes it much more comfortable for riding cross country, but around town this is a much better bike. This also gets better gas mileage than the V-Strom, but I do prefer the inline twos like this. But the V-Strom is a bike that's better for riding on the street if you want to ride aggressively, because the way the V-twin makes power, it's a very broad sort of power curve, so it's got power everywhere. This one's more peaky, but not by much. Like you would have to be graspy as straws to kind of not be able to like keep up with a V-Strom. Like this should be able to keep up with a V-Strom. It's slightly smaller, but It is very flexible. It's the sort of bike that would make a great commuter for anybody in any location. And look at that. It's very well sorted out. The brakes are excellent. This guy needs to... I'm not used to turning on this bike, so I'm running a little wide, but eventually I'll kind of get used to it. I do love the digital dash. It's very simple, it's very cheap, but when you consider the V-Strom's dash, you can see how much more modern this feels. What does this do? Oh, you have emergency lights. Like, I'm not used to that. This is kind of like a BMW-ish sort of button. Like, I don't really like BMW's button system, but that's kind of like what they're doing with this. And you have your kill switch, pretty standard. I just wish they would reverse this. This one's okay. I don't mind the emergency being this far or reversed, but the horn here and the turn signals down here doesn't make a lot of sense for me. Previous CB500, I noticed that the suspension was lacking, and most of these economy entry-level dual sport / adventure bikes, the suspension is always lacking because you have to save money somehow. So that means that manufacturers are not going to put a lot of work into suspension, and it seems like the people, man, really good brakes. I'm not really used to having really good brakes like this. This is very nimble. I just have to kind of get used to the tires. I think the tires might be new. I think they still have the... And you can see really well out of the mirrors. I can barely see my shoulders, which is a great thing. Yeah, I really like the RC51 style dash that they have going. Honda does this a lot with their cars as well. It's a good system. I like it. It's both equally visible to see the tach and the speedometer. It's a nice color. I'm going to show you guys. It kind of looks like very Minecraft looking. The little windscreen doesn't do much for you though. It helps. When you don't have it, you realize how useful a tiny little windscreen like this is. When you think about it, that's one of my pet peeves, is that new motorcycles, they're getting larger. People like wanted small bikes for a little bit, and then they completely forgot, and now all manufacturers are producing bigger and bigger motorcycles again. And it used to be a point when everybody was like, man, so many bikes, so many big bikes, we want small bikes. The manufacturers made like Ninja 250s, and then it went to 300, and then 400, 500, like, and it just keeps going on and on. I thought that a Ninja 250 was actually perfect. I put 87,000 miles on my 08 Ninja 250. The CB500X like this, you can get them for like $3,000. So this is a major bargain. Let's look at the exterior features of the CB500X really quick. This isn't in any way like a long-term review, but I've ridden one of these bikes quite often. I had a white one for a short amount of time. I loved it. It's a twin cylinder, like a parallel twin, so it's very easy to maintain yourself. There is a difference between this bike and the NC700X. This one's a lot more like a motorcycle. The NC700X feels very lazy compared to this engine. I am a fan of these inline 2s. You can see that the front suspension, it's a conventional sort of suspension, and it's very lacking. I think as you push this bike, you will see that you can tell it's a budget bike based on the suspension alone. It's got a single-sided disc brake, and you can see the ABS right here. It's very large, the disc brake. You don't need any more than that. It is nice having the double-sided discs. I think it look better, and they're a little bit better, I think, but the braking on this is fantastic. And with the ABS, it really just helps out quite a bit. And when you look at it, you can see the two header pipes coming in. You also have the engine oil, very easy to get to. You don't even have to use any tools. You can just use your hand. It's got some protection at the bottom here, which is better than my V-Strom, because you can go on gravel roads on this thing and be okay with some rocks hitting it. It is plastic and it's fading a little bit. For the paint scheme, this is nice. It's a flat black or grayish sort of color with the Minecraft X. It's I think it looks good. You know, this bike actually would look good in camo as well. The engine is pretty good. It's a 500cc. He's got an aftermarket exhaust that sounds pretty good. I don't know much about these. The CB500x that I had before had the stock exhaust and it was pretty quiet. This gives it a nice little sound. Let's look at the rear. Nothing special about the rear. You just have the disc brakes. The pads are good. Registration is in Maryland, of course, where I'm at. And you can see he removed the grab rails for the passenger, and he put this on to hold the top case. Top cases are always really nice to have because they don't give you the width of the side cases, and you can split traffic. But I do prefer keeping luggage lower on the bike because, you know, the center of gravity is slightly lower. But this is really good. I think on this cross-country trip I'm going to be strapping my book bag and sleeping bag to here, and whatever I have I'll throw it in here. And handlebars are nice and wide. You know, this is something that's really nice about it. Also, it has this could be kind of an annoyance because there's only one key, and this is the Honda, like the anti-theft thing that they do. So if you ever need to get a new key, it's a pain in the ass, so you have to make sure you don't lose this. So it's very simple. It's water cooled. It's a very good bike. No, too bad it doesn't have a center stand. Center stands are just so much easier to do stuff on. It's very well designed, I think. The thing that I admire most about this bike is the fact that it's not expensive, and you can get one of these bikes relatively cheap compared to the competition. When you compare the V-Strom to this, there is some aspects of the V-Strom that are better. This is a lot more nimble. The V-Strom feels almost like a boat compared to this thing. But this thing makes a lot of sense for commuting, I think. You get much better gas mileage on this, and one of the things I like about motorcycles is the fact that they get really good gas mileage. And I mean, it just looks really good. It's a fantastic looking bike with hardly any miles, 5,000 miles. Let's start it up so you can hear the engine. Turn the key on. It's in neutral. And that's, I don't know if you guys can hear it, but it's pretty quiet. I do like the exhaust. It's kind of like this two-header thing. Or let me crank it up. Sounds pretty good. It's a quiet engine. Like, you're not going to be... I think what I like about this bike as well is the fact that it's a bike that kind of flies under the radar. It's a bike that flies under the radar, so it's not going to impress all the sport bike guys, because, you know, sport bike guys are just into the performance and the horsepower, and I used to be one of those guys. I really enjoy sport bikes. One of the things that annoys me about motorcycle journalists and journalists in general is that they'll take one of these bikes with a 100 miles, and they'll ride it for a few hundred miles and talk about how the suspension is great. And when you're riding a bike like this that only has 5,000 miles, the suspension is new, it's great, but how does it hold up over like 20,000 miles? And that's where the drawback is on bikes like this, that they have the conventional forks in the front that usually bust the fork seals, and these are things that I wish that motorcycle journalists would talk to you about. Because when I buy a motorcycle, even though I'm spending $4,000 on the motorcycle, I want it to be reliable. I don't want to constantly be like fixing things up. And I think that's the reason I was drawn to the V-Strom, and I'm drawn to the Japanese variety of motorcycles, because they're so easy to maintain, and even when you have to fix stuff, it's very cheap. Now, it's not the same thing for BMW, Ducatis, Aprilias, and things like that. They're great bikes when they're working. But something like this, CB500, oftentimes you don't have to do a lot of maintenance to these. You just, keep riding them. Another thing that people do with these bikes, the 500s, they're very popular for guys who want a lighter Africa Twin. So you can get a Africa Twin for $15,000, and that bike is a pig. I'm sure it's a nice bike. I've not ridden the new ones. I've ridden the old ones, and they just weigh so much. So what they do is they have a Dakar Rally kit for this bike that completely changes this more into a adventure bike. So you can get like better suspension, 21-inch front wheel, some different plastic. Basically it's a lot of suspension changes on this. So you are making a lighter Africa Twin. But I believe that Honda probably is going to be coming out with a lighter, smaller Africa Twin. So I don't see much point in spending, I forgot how much, it might be like $1,500 for a Africa Twin kit for this CB500. It feels very good to ride this bike. It's so upright and so casual. Oh god, this guy's going slow. Yeah. It's a very casual bike. I think one of the things I like about motorcycles too is the ability of riding slow when you want to, because with a fast bike, I want to ride fast. Like, I can't really be like putting around. I feel like I have to go faster. This bike, I'm going 32 miles an hour, and I'm not that annoyed that I can't go faster because this guy in front of me. Another nice thing about this bike is that there's not a lot of heat coming around the gas tank. A lot of bikes I've had, especially Hondas, they've had a lot of heat coming through the gas tank because the way they designed the engines. But this one feels very cool between the legs, and that's always a good thing. Yeah, man, brakes are really good. You could almost get in trouble with the brakes. Shifting is a little notchy on this thing. I don't know if this is a Honda thing just with this bike, but the previous bike I had was also kind of notchy. And oftentimes you just need firmer shoes. You don't need like to change the oil or whatever. Well, guys, that's my little preview of the CB500X that I'll be taking cross country from DC to Arizona. And I hope you stick around to watch this trip. I kind of wish that motorcycle journalists would talk a little bit more about how these bikes handle in the long run and on larger rides, because oftentimes you can't really learn a lot about bikes from just taking it, in a day or two in the twisties. So it kind of helps to have some long-term testing, and that's what I plan on doing with this bike. And I'm kind of glad that I found Dave Waka Waka, and he was kind enough to let me borrow this bike so I can ride across the United States. How nice is that? Hopefully I'm not going to get killed. I've done it a couple other times, and it's always been fantastic riding around.